Welcome back after the break. So we're basically discussing the different types of urban settlements. So we discussed central place towns. The next one that we're going to discuss is trade and transport towns. Now, we have three of them. The first one is a break of bulk settlement. Very importantly over here, it's quite easy to remember. It's when the mode of transport change. Now, Durban is your best example. Now, Durban's got a harbour, so what happens? Goods arriving in one form of transport and it leaves Durban in another form of transport. For instance, let's say goods are being imported from China, it arrives at Durban, from the harbour it's getting loaded onto trucks and is then transported to Gauteng. Now, a junction town is usually where two main transport routes meet. A good example is the R, is for instance where the N2 highway and the N1 meet or cross one another. And then we have a gap town. It's usually close to a mountain pass. Now, what is a mountain pass? It's basically a road that goes over a mountain. For instance, a very good example is the Dorings, the Hex River Pass, and we can almost say Harry Smith is also a gap town because it's just as you go basically over the Drakensberg Mountains. Just want to continue to the next slides. Our next towns that we're going to discuss is specialized towns. Now, specialized towns or cities has got one main function. Now, these functions may change, and we have quite a few examples of this. Now, there's a dominant function why this town exists. If that function didn't take place over there, the urban settlement or the town wouldn't have existed. Now, in this function, right, it can happen. If this function doesn't take place anymore, it can turn into a ghost town or a deserted town. So it's very importantly that this function keeps on going. Now, the first one is mining towns. Now, South Africa got quite a few of them because we are rich in minerals. Welkom is a very good example in the Free State. Now, what type of mining is taking place over there? Mainly gold mining. Now, that's the reason. Keep in mind, the settlement existed because it was a primary activity taking place. Now, people move to that settlement. More people requires services. Now, all of a sudden, schools starts to pop up over there. Hospital services. Now, shops, people tend to, okay, listen, it's a good idea to go to Welkom and open a shop because I will make money. I will be profitable because people need to buy things. Another example is educational towns. Now, when we think about educational towns, keep in mind we talk about tertiary education most of the time. For instance, Grahamstown, what do we find in Grahamstown? The university. Another example is Potchefstroom. Now, what do we find? We find the Northwest University over there. If it wasn't for the influx of the university, the town will be deserted. Because keep in mind, every single year, an X amount of students go to this town. Now, what happens? These students require food. So basically what happens? The shops are going to sell more products. These students need to buy fridges, for instance, a microwave. So that's kind of basically, if you look at services, that it's basically going to expand. What happens? These students arrive with their student cars, they need to service their cars. So all of a sudden, there's opportunity for a new workshop to open over there. Very importantly as well, if you look at the educational towns, people provide services to these students. For instance, a printing shop, hairdressers. Keep in mind, all of these activities that the students rely on because they move to this town basically 7 to 8 months a year. Then our next specialized town is industrial towns, cities. That's mainly where manufacturing is taking place. Now, a very good example is Sasolburg. Now, you should know by now, Sasolburg is renowned. What do we make over there? It's basically petrol. So many manufacturing activities taking place over there. And if you look at Secunda, where coal mining is taking place. Now, another example is resort towns. And the most popular example I can give you is Margate. Now, a resort town is basically when people go to relax during holidays. Now, not much is happening in these towns throughout the year, but during school holidays, for instance, April, June, and December, there's an influx of people moving down to the coast to go and spend some time for the holiday. And Margaret is a great example. So it's a specialized town. So what happens over there? As you can imagine, you will find many restaurants over there because it's close to the beach and people like to wine and dine out in these areas. So it specializes only in tourism. So basically it specializes in people going down to Margaret to go enjoy a holiday over December or April or June. Then we have dormitory and commuter towns, very importantly over here. Unfortunately, the reason why these cities developed is because of back in the day apartheid laws. If you look at it, the bylaws, people were not allowed to live in CBD areas, urban areas. So these commuter towns, dormitory towns, developed on the outskirts of cities because they had to carry a pass and they were not allowed to live in the suburban areas. And that's usually on the outskirts of cities. For instance, Soweto, that you will find on the outskirts of Johannesburg. Now, our next topic that we're going to have a look at is the structure of the urban area. Now, what we're going to focus on, we're going to look at the urban profile. Now, and then we're going to look at the street patterns, and we're going to look at the urban land use zones. Now, our urban profile is basically a side profile of an urban area. As you can see, a side view of the urban area. Now, as you can see on the next slide that we have over here, I'm going to use Johannesburg as an example because that's probably our best well-developed urban area in South Africa. Now, right in the middle, we have the CBD. Now, what does the CBD stand for? Central Business District. Now, that's where you find your tallest buildings, residential buildings, and basically businesses. For instance, if you look at Johannesburg CBD, what will you find over there? Anglo-American, most of your big banks like Standard Bank, F&B, these areas, and then obviously a lot of commercial properties like flats, etc. Then we got suburban office parks. Now, this is also known as your outlying business district. A very good example, for instance, Sandton, is decentralization of businesses that moved away from Johannesburg CBD because of the decay, because of the crime, and because of prices. So it has moved away, and we will discuss this in detail in the next couple of slides. Now, obviously, if you look at it, you got your low-income housing situated very close to your CBD. When we're going to look at the different models, the reason why it is because back in the day, there was no such thing. There was public transport, but obviously the low-income housing was closest to the CBD so people can walk to work. A transition zone is the movement from the CBD to the suburban areas. Now, for instance, if you look at your suburban areas, what do you find? Once again, I'm going to use Johannesburg as an example. You've got many shopping centers around Johannesburg, for instance, in the outlying area of the CBD, for instance, Cresta Shopping Center, Rosebank Mall, etc. Then on your outskirts, you got your industrial zones. The reason why in the outskirts, the simple reason why is because of the pollution levels. We're talking about noise pollution and we're talking about air pollution because manufacturing is taking place over there. Your high income residential areas you will also find quite far away from the CBD because people will be able to travel with their own cars to work and back, and because of the property sizes are much bigger. Keep in mind when we look at the CBD, probably the most expensive land values is over there, and that's the reasons why people build up instead of moving outwards. Then we have a rural urban fringe. What do we usually find over there? Our airports. This is basically the end of the urban areas. As soon as you move any further, you're going into the rural areas. Now, when we study our urban profile, we have a look at the density. What does density mean? The amount of buildings in an area. The height of the buildings, like I've mentioned, if you look at the CBD, skyscrapers, very tall buildings, and the land value. Now, kind of makes sense. People build up, not sideways, because it's too expensive. So they'd rather go up. Now, as you can see, the height of the buildings decrease if you move further away from the CBD. As you can see, the height of the buildings are decreasing. The density, the amount of buildings, also decreases from the CBD. Now, you keep in mind, if you look at the CBD, the amount of block of flats over there, once again, if you look at Johannesburg, you go to Hillbrow, the Ponty, there's probably 800, 900 people living in a block of flats over there. So the density, the amount of people also decreases as you move further away from the CBD. Now, the reason why people tend to move away is because of the value of the land. Now, Cape Town, there's a scenario over there. The land is very expensive in Cape Town CBD, and if you look at the property sizes are very small in comparison to the suburban areas. That's cheaper and much bigger. Now, we've discussed the density and the height of buildings. Now, if you think about land values, just quickly going over this again. Now, obviously, closest to the CBD, the land values of it the highest. So basically what happens is instead of moving outwards, people build higher. Now, as you can see, the land value decreases as soon as you go out of the city center. Now, there's another urban profile. Once again, you can see the CBD, tallest buildings, most expensive. Then we got the suburban office parks, also known as the outlying business district. Please pay attention to that because that might be a question in your exam paper. Now, it's quite more peaceful, it's not as rushed, it's not as congested. That's the reason why businesses moved out, and we're going to look at the problems that these urban areas experience a little bit later. Now, the suburban shopping areas, like I've discussed, is basically for the surrounding suburban areas where people can quickly go and buy their groceries or go to the movies or go to dine out. The urban rural fringe, like I discussed it with you, is usually where you find your golf courses or, for instance, your airports. Very good example. If you look at Johannesburg again, the rural urban fringe, if you travel to Hartbeespoort Dam, where Lanseria Airport is. And then if you look at your high income areas, it's about the land size, massive property sizes, people with swimming pool, tennis courts, and big grounds and massive houses. The low cost housing, obviously high density, very small property sizes, and basic services that's available close to them around it. The transitional zone is the area around the CBD, very old buildings, usually run down. You will find your light industries, which we will discuss in our next lesson. It's where textile industries are taking place, where there's a lot of unskilled labor available for these industries. And then our industrial zones, usually on the outskirts, because of the amount of pollution taking place, noise and air pollution, and very close to transport roads to basically transport their products to different parts of the countries. Now, our next topic that I'm going to discuss with you is urban street patterns. Now, grade 12, please pay attention to this section because this might apply to your map work paper as well. Meaning, if they give you a topographical map of, let's say, a town of Paarl, they might ask you to identify the street pattern and give some advantages regarding the street pattern. And we're going to have a look at the different street patterns in the next couple of slides. Now, the layout, how the roads looks. The street patterns are how the roads basically look. Now, keep in mind, this is from a topographical point of view from above. Now, our first one that we're going to have a look at is gridiron. Now, it's very simple. It looks literally like a gridiron. Now, you will see that most of South Africa's massive cities, CBDs, have gridiron patterns. Just want to get to the slide quickly. If you look at it, it's usually found in the CBDs and all the cities. What's the advantages of it? The simple reason why it's the oldest, it's very easy to find your way around. There's many one-way streets that you will find, and the land can be divided a lot much easier. I mean, for instance, per square, it's much easier to divide the land, and it's very easy to find the place that you're looking for. It can be converted into one-way streets like I've mentioned, and what does it do? It eases the traffic. It doesn't cause traffic congestion. Okay, keep in mind when we talk about congestion, it's because of there's too many cars in an area and it causes traffic problems. And another factor, especially when you look at the CBD, little wastage of land. Now, what we've seen in the previous couple of slides, that land is very expensive in the CBD, the value of the land. So basically, little wastage of land. We're not going to spend a lot of surface area on roads because of this gridiron pattern. Now, the disadvantages, it depends on the amount of people. It can cause congestion because of the stop-start and because of the one-ways. There might be more accidents at the intersections, especially when the robots will be out. And it's not very exciting. It's quite boring. So it's not very interesting. It's one-ways to the one-way. It's just one-ways up and down the street. But once again, very importantly, when we look at this gridiron pattern, we know it's easy to find your way around it. After the break, we'll quickly look at the next couple of street patterns.